Hello everyone and welcome back to another minute concept, this time on calculus, our very first video on limits. So for this minute concept, we're just gonna quickly describe limits and how we can solve for them, but we're not going to go too in depth on how we actually do the solving. So for example, take this function, which is shown by the graph here, and is described by x squared. Now, limits describe the behavior of our graph or our function here, x squared, as x approaches a certain value. Of course, you're not only limited to x, sometimes they might give you, for example, a function in terms of y, or a function in terms of any other variable really. But the general idea is, we're trying to see that if we're going to approach our value that we want to see, for example, in this case, x approaches 2, we want to see what happens when we're approaching 2. We want to see if they're approaching the exact same point. Because if they approach the same point, then their limit exists. And that is what we call the two-sided limit. So when they approach the same point, they have that value has a two-sided limit, and this function has a two-sided limit at that point. And what is the value we're looking at here? We're basically looking at the output value. So for those who don't remember, f of x, the result that you get from here is the output, while the input here, x itself, such as this one, this is what we call the input. And we're basically trying to understand what value we're approaching, or what value is outputted as we approach a certain input. And we can get this through three methods. So the first is substitution, where we substitute the value that we're approaching directly to see if it works and if we can evaluate the function. Because if we can evaluate the function, that normally means the value is that function is continuous at that point and the limit exists. Now sometimes there's an extra step. Sometimes we have to factor and then substitute. And this is also a valid way to solve for the limit. However, this time it involves a bit more algebra. And there's also the final one, which is the table of values, where we solve for both one-sided limits rather, and we try to determine if they're approaching a similar point. So for example here, if we were to do a table of values, we'd be getting infinitely small or infinitely close numbers to 2 from the left side and infinitely close numbers to 2 from the right side. So perhaps 1.99 or 2.0001, and we're going to be comparing if when we substitute them into this function, if they approach the same point. So that is basically the gist of what limits are, and I'm going to go in depth more on how to solve for the limit in the next video, our in-depth concept. So thank you everyone for watching, and I hope that you guys learned something from this video. Thank you and goodbye.